So the National Consumer Commission has warned retailers and suppliers against hiking prices on essential items at least to make up for losses incurred during the recent civil unrest in the country. Price hikes for goods listed under the Consumer and Customer Protection and National Disaster Management regulations are prohibited. Companies found guilty of profiteering, if you like, in light of possible food shortages face stiff fines of up to 1 million rand or 1 year behind bars. What else should we consider? Let's bring in Acting National Consumer Commissioner Thezi Mabuza, who joins us now via our video link. Ma'am Thezi, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to chat to us. I wonder, what does the Consumer Protection Act actually say about possible price hikes, even in the midst of unpredictable shocks to the market like the unrest we've seen?
Under this situation, we find ourselves where we are right now in the midst of a pandemic wherein we are still within the state of national disaster. Under normal circumstances in South Africa, we don't interfere with prices, we don't interfere with the market. But given that we are within the state of the national disaster, there is Regulation 350 that speaks to the unconscionable and unfair conduct when it comes to pricing of by suppliers on basic foods that were listed within the regulation. So what that says is that even if we had these incidences of the unrest and the looting, we are still within that space of the national disaster. So it is imperative that our retailers as well, they still adhere to the Act in terms of not being unfair, not rising prices unjustly so, but still stay within that regulation wherein they have set their own margins in relation to their own profits. So we are asking them that please remain true to that regulation, wherein there is justifiable reasons, maybe stemming from the supply side. Then that will be justified by them giving reasons. But in this case, if there's no unjustified costs, like what we have seen right now, where people had stock, and that stock was still within the limits in which they sourced it in terms of the pricing, and all of a sudden, then they use the issue of the law of demand and supply to hike their prices. We're saying that is unjust and it's unfair.
Yeah, I guess many people will also be wondering how you gauge that, because what is and isn't unjust is open to interpretation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And the regulation is very clear, Ayanda, on that issue, is that we're looking at the margins that they have set for themselves. Every store has its own profit margins in terms of the markups that they would have for them to break even and make a profit. So they set those for themselves, is their own parameters. So what we are saying when we are looking at the unjustness and the unfairness, it's wherein now we'll take their trend that they have set for themselves to look at their prices. Let's say the golden rule is that our markup is 40%. And all of a sudden, because we have this unprecedented demand, then you would see that people would hike their profit margins to be something, let's say, around 75%. Then in that case, that is not justifiable because we have moved away from the trend driven by the law of demand and supply on those basic goods within the state of a national disaster.
That's important detail, because that doesn't necessarily mean that consumers are protected from goods being more expensive. In a context where a supermarket is having a pressure on their own supply side, they may very well be justified in hiking the prices of those goods because of something like the unrest.
Yes, that is true. And we have seen there, I think last year also around May, June, wherein we have seen the scarcity of wheat, wherein then from the value chain, then wheat was raised in terms of the price per ton, then that had a knock-on effect on the price of bread and the price of flour. But then that also happened as well with our cooking oil, as we have seen, the scarcity in the seeds that we had seen. And then that led to the increase in prices from the supply side. So that would mean that us as consumers in the demand side will actually have to absorb those. So the price increases are allowed as long as it is justified by the input costs.
What kind of conversations, if any, are taking place around government absorbing that shock? I mean, it would, I guess, feel counterintuitive for the very same consumers to bear the brunt of what no one predicted.
I think government from the legislation part of it, I think that we are doing our best, and we are doing our best in terms of consultation as well with businesses and all that, so that we meet each other halfway. But I think because of the non-interference in terms of the free market, I think that from our side, in the demand side, it will be difficult to interfere. But then I think there will be certain concessions that will be made if necessary by government, and I am sure that our legislation and the president right now, they are looking into that to see what is it that can be done to mitigate the circumstances that we find ourselves at. But the responsibility again lies with us as South Africans to really not be self-inflicting in our actions and the way that we approach things.
With all of that being said, are you seeing signs of unjustifiable price hikes in any of the products in our markets?
Yes, we had really seen that. Already people started complaining as far back as like last week, over the weekend, wherein people would leave messages and all that. But we also have seen around the area in KZN, and especially the northern side of Durban and all that, wherein a consumer just called us, showed us a receipt wherein they bought 2.5 dozen, 30 eggs, which we know normally range between, range between 50 rand to like 60 rand, wherein they paid something like 175 rand. And then people would buy bread for like 30 rand and so on. So we have seen that. And those are basic food and issues like formulas as well, baby formulas that people are complaining about. But then we are following that up, and then we're saying that from us, because it's unjustified as we are seeing it, we will deal with them accordingly and do our proper investigations around those areas.
The consequence could be as much as R1 million. How are you gauging what is a justifiable consequence for unjustified price hikes?
In this case, because it's unjustified, what we will be looking at, like we did with the sanitizers last year, we would look at the profit that people will have derived from that. We would also look at their conduct as a supplier, because sometimes people just take advantage and say, I wouldn't be caught. And then what we would do is we'd look at their annual turnover as to what was it in terms of the audited financial statement of the prior year, and then compare that to the 1 million, and then we take whatever that is greater. So you would find that when a supplier's turnover is lesser, then we would actually look for that administrative fine of R1 million. But then also what justifies that as well is the conduct of the supplier during the investigation itself, their cooperation in giving us the information that we need, and then also to look at the track record as to how far back did that happen, so that we can look as to whether their conduct by itself is that aggravating that we can actually go for a maximum fine of 1 million or the 10% of their turnover. So it's those issues that we take into consideration. It's not really kind of like fixed and say it's really going to be a 1 million. It depends on their turnover, and then it depends on the conduct and the other aggravating circumstances that we find when we do the investigation.
Fair enough. Very quickly then, a lot of our focus in this discussion and many others has been on essential items specifically being the target, or rather being under scrutiny. Do the regulations under the national disaster restrict you just to those products, or can someone, for instance, complain about a price hike in, I don't know, makeup, for instance?
Yes. In this case now, the state of disaster looks at what is essential. Issues like TV that is very expensive, or maybe, as you said, makeup, because it's not essential. You can do without makeup. That's what most of us do under normal circumstances. But what we are looking at is what is essential for us to survive under these circumstances, like your baby formula, your bread, your rice, your maize meal, your SAM, sugar, milk, our vegetables and fruits. Those are the things that we're talking about. They're essential for us, your canned meat, your frozen meat. So that is what is essential for us to survive here.
Maybe makeup wasn't the best example. I can already see you and I coming under fire for thinking that makeup is not essential. But thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Really appreciate the clarity you've given us this morning. That's Ma'am Thezi Mabuza. She's the acting Consumer Commissioner with the National Consumer Commissioner itself. Thanks very much indeed.